Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to BIC Streams. Bangalore International Center, or BIC for short, is an inclusive and neutral platform for informed conversation, intellectual dialogue, and exchange of ideas, arts, and culture. Today's session is Muslims on the Margin, a personal perspective. While several government institution commissions have repeatedly pointed out that socially and economically, Muslims are among the most backward of communities in India in the last several years, a sense of pervasive fear is being perpetrated on the community to ensure that they voluntarily cede whatever mainstream space they have come to occupy. What are the systematic, organized, and unorganized ways that further the shrinking of Muslims from the national mainstream? These and more questions will be addressed in this session, which is around the book Born a Muslim by journalist and author Ghazala Wahab. Ghazala will be in conversation today with author and historian Rajmohan Gandhi. The full bios of the speakers will appear on your chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please feel free to use the Q&A box to pose your questions, comments, and observations, and the speakers will address them towards the end. And now I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Gandhi.
Thank you, Lekha. Thank you very much. And I offer my greetings to everybody who is viewing and joining this conversation. And I want to say to Ghazala ji that this is an original, significant, pioneering contribution, this book. Well done, Ghazala ji. One major takeaway from this, how little we know of the injuries daily caused to fellow Indians. There's also another important, though minor point that I want to mention about the book, Ghazala ji, that your explanations and footnotes in the book are very helpful. Since even people with goodwill are very poorly informed and unfamiliar with Urdu words that are in common use, your footnotes are extremely helpful. So among many things, I thank you for those as well. Now, your book has a wide range. You give your family story. You also give the story of India's diverse Muslims. You write about different sects and movements in Indian Islam, including Tablighi Jamaat, Jamaat-e-Islami. You write about the insecurities of India's Muslims. You write about women in Indian Islam. You write about Muslims in India's politics. Before I ask you a few questions, let me, for the sake of viewers, summarize part of the family story that you tell. Your grandfather, involved in wood and carpentry work, is the leading figure, much respected, living in a crowded settlement outside Agra city. Then he moves with his joint family to a settlement within Agra city. Your father stops his studies after class 8 in school and does very well in the shoe business. And he moves with his wife and children into a house he builds in an elite area in Agra. He's the only Muslim living in that area with successful, mostly high caste Hindus. Now, Agra's leading figures, officers, officials come constantly to your home to eat, to drink, to socialize. You go to college in Delhi. You're the only Muslim in your college class in Delhi. In 1986, your grandfather, this venerated figure, dies in your father's new home. Now, while you are in your teens, from 1990 onwards, your world changes. Your family and India's Muslim community become insecure. Fear replaces hope and confidence. And because of the tension sparked by Advani's 1990 Yatra in a Toyota Rath against the Babri Masjid and for a Ram Mandir, you are summoned to Agra. Your home there is attacked. And when you are there in the home, your father gives you a set of telephone numbers and you dial furiously. No one answers or does anything. The family car in the compound is just destroyed. Luckily, the mob does not enter your house. Meanwhile, the inner city settlement where your uncles and aunts live is attacked. Uncles of yours are arrested. With your parents, you go to the settlement. You see the scene and you cry. So now I want you to read a paragraph from page 28 of your book about what happens.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much for these wonderful words that you have said about the book and agreeing to this conversation. I'm really, really overwhelmed. So this paragraph is, but I knew for sure that some of my tears were for the sheer helplessness that I knew my father and my uncle were feeling. Physically, they may have traveled a small distance from the Muslim mohalla to an upper-class Hindu colony, but emotionally, they had traveled the distance of a lifetime. In the family comprising 6 brothers and 4 sisters, these 2 men had most visibly shed their ghettoized Muslim identities. They were at home in the social, cultural, and economic life of Agra, hobnobbing with the who's who of the city. And yet, when it came to communal division, they were nothing but Muslims, forever suspects, forever scapegoats.
Thank you, Ghazala. Now, those who attacked these uncles of yours, were any cases registered against those who were attacked, against the attackers?
No, it was the PAC, the Provincial Armed Constabulary, and nothing ever happens against the police.
So the police itself was attacking, and of course nothing happened.
Because any action would lead to demoralization of the forces. So that has been our standard response to any action or accountability for our law enforcement forces, unfortunately.
So this is 1990, and then of course the Babri Masjid demolition of December 1992. Tell us about that. In your home, you watched it on TV.
Again, I was studying in Delhi, but because of the growing tensions, I was called back home, and all the family, we had kind of huddled in our television room, and we were watching the proceedings on television. BBC was showing it live at that time. And at some point, it seemed that there would be just a lot of speeches and nothing more would happen. And at that point, I left and I went to the study. And instead of wasting my time watching nothing but speeches, I just spent some time in the study. And then suddenly, my mother called out my name and said, "Hey, come, just come down and see what is happening." And on the television screen, I just saw this a cloud of dust. And my uncle was talking to somebody on the phone, and he said, "Masjid gir gayi," the mosque has fallen. And I was completely shocked because I didn't believe something like this would actually happen. It's not just the violence of that, in which people clawing it, climbing on the dome and pulling it down brick by brick. It was the whole sentiment that in the full view of the who's who of the political leadership, the police and the paramilitary, their army and stand by a little distance away, and something like this has been allowed to happen. So it was. It's easy to say betrayal. It's a sense of betrayal, but I think more than that, what I personally felt was complete shock and fear that if something like this is allowed to happen, what more would be allowed to happen? I mean, where will this kind of mob stop? So I think that is how I felt at that point.
Thank you. Sorry?
No.
So no, I think many students of our times would say that December 6, 1992 was when something fundamental happened to India, sadly. Now, going back to the 1990 incident, when these police officers and others who enjoyed your family's hospitality, they were unreachable when you really needed them. Did any of them afterwards express regret for their failure to help?
No, it was completely brushed under the carpet. And actually, my family also never brought it up again, because there was so much of humiliation involved in that incident. I mean, so it was best that nobody spoke about it again.
Now, returning to your grandfather for a minute, Agra, many people have already forgotten the historical significance of Agra, that Agra was the capital of Mughal Hindustan for a considerable period. Taj Mahal is not the only place. There are some fantastic historical monuments in Agra. Everybody knows that. And then your grandfather in his settlement, and then your father has successful shoe business. So two things. One, tell us a little bit about your grandfather, if you feel like, and then tell us also about today's state of the shoe business and leather business in Agra and in UP.
In the late 60s, early 70s, because of our very good relationship with the Soviet Union, the shoe trade to the Eastern Bloc, the entire Eastern Bloc, was like all other trade, was done through government-to-government agreements. So there were no private business people involved in it. So any business person who wanted to export had to get himself or herself registered with the government organization, which was trading organization. So my grandfather, he was a completely illiterate person, and he used to work in one of the shoe factories in Agra, which was an exporter, and he was a weekly wager. So whenever he used to get the weekly wage, he used to put his thumb imprint on the receipt book to acknowledge that he has received his wage. But when my father had to drop out of school and join his father to supplement the family income, he didn't want to either write his name in Urdu or Hindi or put his thumb imprint. And his desire was to do so in English. So that is how he started teaching himself English. And the first thing he did was how to write his name, or how to sign his name in English. And he used to go to a local munshi who was affiliated with the factory. And that's how he started teaching himself to read and write English language. So he's entirely self-taught. So this is a little bit of the family background. And because of my father's diligence and his obsession to learn, he was amongst the very early people in Agra who learned how to design a pattern, who learned how to cut a pattern. Usually what happens is the country which is buying footwear from you, they give you not only a sample, but they give you the way that sample has to be made. A shoe comprises several components. So each component has to be cut in a pattern, has to be cut on a piece of paper, and then it is copied on leather. So my father was one of the very early people who not only learned how to do this in Agra, but mastered it to an extent that whenever a very complex piece of footwear would come and nobody would be able to do it, people from different factories would approach him and ask him to do it. That is how he got himself registered with State Trading Corporation, and very senior people there, director, he kind of discovered my father's talent, and he said, why don't you work with us directly? And that's how he started his factory and started supplying material to STC, which was further exported. And over a period of time, he became a direct exporter to Soviet Union and GDR, Poland, the entire Eastern Bloc. And over a period of time, he was, there was a period about few years in the early 80s when he was the biggest exporter to the Eastern Bloc from India. And he was felicitated by the president. Then he did some very complex footwear designs, long boots for women, for which he also got an award, the national award for designing. So he had completely self-made, self-tutored, and he managed to create this wonderful life for himself and his children, gave us these opportunities that I could come out of Agra, study in Delhi, and eventually pursue a career.
Thank you so much, Lalaji. And I want to say that through this conversation with you just now, we're also saluting the achievements of your father and your grandfather. And your father's story, your family story has so many fabulous landmarks and some very sad milestones also. But through this conversation, we are also expressing our respect for their remarkable achievements. Now, moving away from your family's story, because you write about so many challenges and issues faced by the Muslim community across India. You speak of the varieties of India's Muslims, the Sayyids, the Sheikhs, the Pathans, and the rest. And you give glimpses of Muslims all across India. But this also is something, I wonder whether you would like to say a bit more on this, because many Hindus and even others think that the Muslims of India are sort of a homogeneous community of a particular kind, but there are so many incredible varieties of Muslims in every state of India. So would you like to say a word about the variety and the diversity of India's Muslims?
You know, Muslims worldwide are diverse, but that worldwide diversity is just accentuated even more in India. Because in India, apart from the fact that we have Shia, Sunni, within the Sunnis, we have Sheikh, Sayyid, you know, this is a class hierarchy. Then amongst the Shias, you have Khojas, you have Ismailis, and you have what are called the 12ers. So these are universal divisions, but within that, then we have things like people with a Deobandi persuasion, people with a Barelvi persuasion. Then we have people, you know, the North Indian Muslims, they're completely different from Muslims in West Bengal or Muslims in Gujarat or the Muslims in South India. And I think this diversity comes not only from the fact that they live in these different regions, but also their acquaintance with the religion itself. There are the Muslims in the southern part of India. They converted to Islam because of their exposure to the Arab traders. A lot of them had intermarriages with Arabs because Arab men traders would come here, settle down here, marry local women. So that was their exposure, and that is where the peculiarity comes from. Muslims in the northern parts of India, they kind of trace their lineage from Turks, partly from Central Asian people, partly from the Persians. Then plus there's a lot of conversion which happened here. So all of this has created a very diverse and community, not only diverse, but very distinguishable from each other. You can actually look at a Muslim in Kashmir and say that he's a Kashmiri, not because of his accent, but even in the manner in which he practices or she practices the religion. Or a Muslim from Kerala, again, because of the specific way of the practice, the specific attire they wear, which is a mix of the local as well as a little bit of Arab influence, which continues to this day. So I think it's a very, very lively sort of a community if you look at it with an open mind and not through prejudiced glasses.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned the fact of the Arabs coming in the 8th, 9th centuries. You know, the notion that Islam came to India with the sword. But the Arabs who traded in the 8th, 9th centuries with South India, with both coasts, both the western coast and the eastern coast, and settled there, and their descendants are still there. So as you point out, there is an incredible and rich diversity. And then the Muslims of Assam, Muslims of Bengal, Muslims of UP, Bihar. I mean, every state of India has a distinct Muslim identity. So thank you for. Now, so the question is this, that how do India's Hindus, and actually Muslims too, and secularists and pluralists get to know the Muslim reality. We are not just politically or ideologically polarized. We lead separate, segregated, uninformed lives, even illiterate lives. So I know that your book will help a lot. And I hope that more films and more documentaries will be created. But I just want you to reflect on this need we have, that we need to get to know one another more closely and more accurately.
You know, before the partition, we didn't have, I mean, there were instances of violence and communal violence, but the communities lived together in a very organic way. We didn't have these huge mega cities. So in a village, there was so much of interdependence on each other. In small towns, people just lived together, Muslims, Hindus, and they depended on each other for economic reasons, for social reasons. So they knew, understood each other better. But as we moved into the modern times and we built these mega cities, there was so much of insecurity, I think even amongst Hindus, that they preferred to stick to their own kinds. They preferred to stay with their own type of people. So a group of Bengalis would prefer living only with other Bengalis. This kind of insularity pushed Muslims really away from the mainstream, because the less you got to know them, more you feared them. And more you feared them, more you wanted to push them out of the mainstream. The consequence today is that any kind of kanat, any kind of most unbelievable stories about a Muslim is believed, and believed widely by people. They don't even wonder that how is this possible that somebody so beastly, somebody so ghastly has been living in India, and yet we are all safe. So this is the reason for this is because they don't know Muslims. There aren't many Muslims in the mainstream now, and whenever there are a few, because of all this that is happening in the last few years, the rumor mongering, the specific targeting of the poor, and actually the biggest ambassadors of any community are the poor, because these are the people, for economic reasons, they migrate from place to place. They go out to work. They're coming into your houses to do your odd jobs. They are selling vegetables outside your fancy apartments, gated colonies. So they're the biggest ambassadors of their own community. Now, if they are targeted, they have to assume false identities only to be able to, peddle or do their work there. That sort of marginalization has most dangerous consequences for any society which is as diverse as ours. If you're pushing 15% or 18% of your population out of your national mainstream, you're making them economically so vulnerable that they're not even able to contribute to your economic development. You are basically stymieing your own self. You're actually impinging on your own, as the saying goes, you're actually putting your own leg on the axe. You're hurting yourself. And in the bargain, you are creating this fear about the other so much that this fear will debilitate your own children, your own environment, and foster more insecurity.
Thank you, Ghazala ji. I was interested that you write that when you were in college in Delhi, you were perhaps the only Muslim in your college class, and your non-Muslim classmates showed no curiosity while you were there to know from you more about your lives or Muslim lives. I think this too is a very interesting reality today, that even when there are some Muslims available close to us, next to us, we don't take the opportunity to really get to know them. So this, I think, this creation of knowledge and familiarity, and I hope more people will learn from your example. You write your story, and that more of us, whatever our religion or background, that we will really get to know our fellow Indians who live close to us, and what the attacks they face on their bodies, on their sentiments. People living only a few yards away from us, but we know nothing about them. And I think this is true even of many who have sympathy for the Muslims or empathy for Muslims, but they don't have knowledge. They don't have information. So this is something where your book is helping a lot. Now, so changing slightly subject, you have provided in your book a summarized history of early Islam in the Arab world. Not so much the Islam, say, of Iran or Islam of Turkey, which are also very important in the world. However, I think a calmer, more objective discussion of history can also be useful. And of course, this discussion of partition in India, why it happened, what partition actually was. You know, so many Hindus have convinced themselves that when partition took place, it was the duty of all the Muslims of India to migrate to Pakistan. That was, of course, nobody agreed, said that. That was not the agreement when partition was accepted by everybody, sadly or unhappily by many, enthusiastically by many on both sides. Nobody at that point said, neither the British, nor the Congress, nor the Muslim League, nor the Akalis, that all the Muslims of India had to go to Pakistan. It was not as if there was one Muslim nation being created and one Hindu nation being created. Muslim majority areas were allowed to separate and form a separate country. So at some stage, I hope that we will have a calm discussion about the history of partition. But this is more an observation from me, sparked by some of your writings. Now, I want to mention one other thing. You mentioned that there was a time when relations at the grassroots were more cordial. However, let us also remember that in the 1947 terrible killings, which the vast majority of the killings in that particular year took place in Punjab on both sides. In Western Punjab, Hindus and Sikhs were brutally killed by Muslims. In East Punjab, Muslims were brutally killed by Hindus and Sikhs on a very large scale. And the British, before leaving, they had a very small and not very efficient, but quite remarkable boundary force, led by one or two English people. And there was Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs in that small force. They tried their best. Now, when you read the history of that boundary force and its work, you discover that during that time, when this boundary force was expected to control the situation in Punjab, not a single Muslim fired a shot at any Muslim attacker. Not a single Hindu or Sikh fired a shot at a Hindu or Sikh attacker. These were all part of the British-led Punjab boundary force. So there was, so in the past also, while there have been some wonderful coexistence, friendship, participation, there was also this very sad sentiment. So equally, we also know, and I've had a chance to make research on the story of Punjab, not just the 47 killings, but even the early killings. And on the 47 killings, all those who have read and interviewed people know that yes, killings were brutal and terrible, but the number of people who saved their fellows was a much larger number. Those who protected their fellows outnumbered those who were attacking their fellows. So from history, we can also take this. So anyway, now, as you were mentioning, in earlier decades, before December 6, 1992, there was another atmosphere. In earlier years, we had Gandhi, we had Nehru, we had a secular government. The media was not controlled by the majoritarians, even if the police didn't always protect those who were attacked. Let us not imagine that these attacks on minorities only took place after the BJP came to power. Many, in UP and elsewhere, some very sad attacks had taken place. But then there was a time when there were influential Muslim cabinet ministers, because not only Maulana Azad, many others. There were Muslim presidents, there were Muslim chief ministers of states. Today, they control the climate all in majoritarian hands. So this is a tough reality. Have you any reflection on this reality?
I think this is, as far as politics is concerned, this is the worst time for a Muslim, because they are completely irrelevant to the democratic process in India. Whether they vote or they don't vote, nothing changes, or nothing will change, because the way the narrative has shaped. The moment there is anybody who's raising the voice for a Muslim or talking about any Muslim issue, everybody else immediately converges on the opposite side. What we see now is this a creation of the majoritarian vote bank. I think in terms of politics, it's a very, very bad situation in India as far as Muslims are concerned. The only hope I see, and maybe things will improve, is that the majoritarian themselves, they should understand, they should be empathetic towards everybody, including the Muslims, and they should address their issues. In any case, the expectations from the government for any community is that they should have fair share of the government's largesse of whatever opportunities that the government offers to the citizens. They should have equal access to that, and they should have justice. If they are wrong in some way, or if some wrong has happened to them, they should be fair trial, and they should be given justice. Both of these are not happening under the present circumstances, especially in certain states of the country where the BJP is in power, and where they are in where the opposition is extremely weak. We have instances in northern states where a Muslim has been attacked on false charges, and the case is filed by the police. The charge sheet is filed against a Muslim. So a lot of such things are happening. So I think the difference between now and the earlier times is, earlier times people may have harbored prejudice against one another. Muslims may have had prejudice against Hindus, and Hindus may have had prejudice against Muslims. But this was not part of civil society. This was not part of polite society. People would not talk about this openly. They'd keep it within themselves, or they'd just talk about this among their core family or very close friend network. Because it was considered impolite to talk about this. It was considered bad behavior to tell a Muslim on her face that you are a terrorist, or you are whatever. This boundary has been crossed now. Now it's no longer impolite to actually accuse somebody of the worst things possible, the worst things you could imagine. And you know, even when you're accusing the other person, you know that this is not true. You know it cannot be true, because your own experience, your lived-in experience of the last so many decades, your experience of your forefathers, everything tells you that the accusation that you're making is not correct. But you do not hesitate to make this, because now there is no punitive action one that happens against you, or which is you're not punished for doing this. The other thing is, it has become acceptable. It's mainstream now that you can say anything, and nobody will judge you for your choice of words, for your conduct. On the contrary, maybe this can benefit you if you aspire for a political career. So the more vicious you are, maybe further you will go politically. So I think this is the major difference between what used to happen pre-1990 and now. As a society, we are becoming less civil, less dignified.
Well, thank you for these very sobering reflections, indeed, Ghazala ji. Now, on this, of course, those who follow what's happening in the world know that this is not exclusively an Indian story. all over the world, there is this notion now. Earlier there was a notion that all of humanity is one, all of humanity is one. But now there is a notion that countries belong more to one lot of people than to others. America belongs to the whites. Afghanistan belongs to the Pashtuns. Iran belongs to the Shia. India belongs to the Hindus. And so this notion that non-Hindus are somehow second-class citizens is fortunately not yet part of our constitution. It is absolutely not. And even today, in this altered and very often depressing atmosphere, we find judges, we find journalists, we find others reminding the Indian nation of what the constitution says about equality, that India is everybody's country. An atheist, a communist, a Muslim, Shia, Sunni, Hindus of all kinds, Sikhs, Dalits, Christians, everybody, Buddhists, Jains, India belongs to us all. So that is the reality still today. And every now and then, there is also some encouraging news. The election results of West Bengal in May were fantastic results. I mean, imagine the propaganda that was unleashed and the resources behind that propaganda. That juggernaut, that heavily financed juggernaut could do nothing. And this woman with her injured foot, she won. And even today in Punjab, which has seen terrible, terrible things, there is today in Indian Punjab an amazing feeling among Sikhs and Hindus that we should have a better relationship with the Muslims, even better relationships with the people of Pakistan. Government is one thing, but with the people of Pakistan. So there is Bengal in the east, there is Punjab in the west, there is Kerala in the south, there is Tamil Nadu in the south. So despite the grim scene that you are looking at, the grim scene that I'm looking at, there also are some rather positive things happening. And I will repeat what I've said before, that if only those of us who have experienced something, whether positive or negative, but something that is deeply, that affects us, we should record it. We should write it down. We should share it. We should make films or documentaries. I wish, I'm old and I'm completely unlearned in all the technology, but I envy those who can. But this is what I would say, that your example should be followed. And more of us should just enable fellow Indians to know the facts and let the facts lead us where they may. So now, I want you to give your thoughts to three different groups of people in any way, and take your time with this. So those, whether they are Muslims or Hindus or whatever in India, who are, say, on your side or on my side, on the side of equality, on the side of humanity, on the side of the Indian Constitution, who believe in an India that belongs equally to all, that everyone has equal rights. What should people like us do, in your opinion, and how can we do better? So first, I want your comment on this.
I think I'll answer this in two parts. One is express hope and gratitude for everybody who was still holding on to this idea of India being a secular, inclusive country, and who's struggling every day, even to great danger to their own lives, to ensure that it stays like that, whether coming out on roads and streets and protesting, whether writing articles or books or on social media. So all of this is building some sort of a reservoir from which everybody can draw strength from. So I think that is my first part of my answer. My other part is a little bit of grouse, and that grouse is that a lot of well-meaning people also sometimes they try and draw false equivalences, and maybe they mean well, but they are They probably do not understand enough, or they just want to play it safe and ensure that they remain equidistant. So if they want to criticize, let's say, the radical Hindus, then in the same vein, they have to immediately criticize radical Muslims. The problem with this is that the situations or the circumstances of radical Hindus or radical Muslims are very different. So if you have to attack radicalization or radicalism in the society, you have to see the source of it, you have to attack the source of it. The behavior, the public behavior or public posturing, radical public posturing is a consequence or it's a manifestation of the cause which has been lying unattended. So just drawing an equivalence and thinking that your job is done, I think it's not correct. There could be some very serious reasons why a lot of young Hindu people are disillusioned with the Muslims. They feel they have been cheated by Muslims. They feel that over a period of time, Muslims have been appeased by government after government at the cost of the Hindus. If this is the source of their grievance, and if this is the cause which is making them radical or turning them into less civil people, then this needs to be addressed. They have to be told that what you think is correct or not correct, or why things have happened the way they have happened. Similarly, the Muslim who are getting radicalized or who are radical at the moment, you need to understand where is this radicalization coming from. Is this a factor that they have been wronged by the law enforcement agencies? Is this a factor they've been discriminated against in some areas? Is it because there is some fancy notion of global ummah that they have? So unless you target the cause, you cannot address this problem. So I think when we are talking about, and liberals actually do tend to do this. I mean, when you're talking of, for instance, in recent times, a lot of people have been criticizing the RSS. Many liberals just immediately tend to say, okay, so RSS is bad, Taliban are bad. Now, RSS is here in India. Well, what RSS does will have impact here on our lives, both Hindus, Muslims, everybody. What Taliban is doing in Afghanistan will have impact on their lives. On very unfortunate, but it doesn't impact on our everyday life of people here. In a long, convoluted way, well, yes, terrorism can come here. So, but that is right now not in the control of ordinary citizens. I mean, I cannot do anything to stop them, but I can do something to stop an Indian Muslim from thinking that he or she needs to pick up arms against the state. I can do that. So I think I should be doing that instead of brushing this under the carpet or brushing the RSS under the carpet because I don't want to talk about the Muslims. So these false equivalences are damaging us more than we realize, and it is perpetuating the myths about Muslims in India.
So thank you. These are very helpful points, very clarifying points. You know that some white nationalists in the United States, when they face criticism about their racism, about the situation of African Americans in the United States, they say, look at the way in some parts of Africa, some African governments are treating some Africans. They are enslaving Africans, they claim. So what you say is so true, that merely because some Africans in Africa are treating fellow Africans badly does not give white America the right to oppress African Americans in America. So as you point out, if Muslims in Afghanistan or elsewhere are treating fellow Muslims or minorities or women badly, that does not give others the right to oppress people where they are. And there's one other point I would like to add on this. There is such a thing as honor, such a thing as gallantry. If a huge majority oppresses a minority, and the state forces, police or whatever of the majority oppress the minority, where is the bravery in it? Where is the honor in it? So I think that those are very important points you make about false equivalences. Thank you so much. So now my next question. The first one was your message to secularists and liberals. Now, what is your message to fellow Muslims and to other Muslim women in India?
I think this is my favorite part. They should not only learn about their own religion, and they should also learn about their own history. The reason they should learn about their own religion and learn it from on their own through proper sources and not rely on the mullahs is because when somebody tells them, misleads them and says that this is Islamic, this is not Islamic, they should be able to answer that person back that I know what my religion is about. So the problem with majority of Muslims in India today, and I'm not using the word majority casually, I'm using it very consciously, is that they have mortgaged their own faith to a very small group of clergy. Though Sunni Islam doesn't have a concept of clergy, but we have created because we do not want to take responsibilities for our own action. So we cannot, we don't have confidence in our own practice of faith. So we need to constantly validate it from somebody who we think would know better than us. So I think the first thing they need to do is learn about their own religion, learn it correctly so that they're able to answer somebody who tells them that what you're doing is un-Islamic. They should be able to reason and rationalize their behavior and take responsibility for it. The other thing is they should learn about the history, not only the history in India, but actually the history of Islam, the way it, the reason it spread in Arabia and the neighboring places so fast, and what was the message, what was the principal purpose of Islam, which moved so many people to convert. This notion that there were forced conversions actually takes away from the core message. There was obviously something about the message of Islam, something which appealed to a large number of people who converted, who were influenced or moved by it. And that is how it spread so rapidly. So what was that message? That message was not that you have to pray 5 times a day or you have to practice your religion only through dogmatic behavior. The message was of egalitarianism. The message was of equality, not only between fellow human beings, but between genders. The message was of justice, of fair play. So these are the things they need to understand, and they will, if they read this, they will also understand that they need not be apologetic for the conduct, correct conduct or imagined conduct of their forefathers in India. I mean, some may have been terrible people and some may have been very good, but the present day Muslims, they need not be apologetic about them. It's not their responsibility what has happened in the past.
Thank you. So the last question in this, and then after that, I'll just offer a couple of sentences. This is the last question to you. If you were to meet Prime Minister Modi or Home Minister Amit Shah, what would you say to them? Imagine that they are listening to this. We should believe that this discussion is so interesting that they are also watching. So what will you say to Shri Modi and Shri Shah?
You know, Mr. Modi has claimed that he is a strong man and he is creating a strong, secure India. But the truth is, in our 75-year-old history, we have never been as insecure as we are today. We are insecure on our borders, whether it's with China or Pakistan. We are insecure inside the country. For the first time, the majority community in India, despite its overwhelming numbers, despite their fellow or co-religionists being in position of power, whether it's law enforcement or judiciary or politics, despite everything, they still feel frightened. There is a sense of insecurity despite all this. So where is this insecurity coming from? Obviously, this insecurity is being manufactured, peddled day in, day out. And this fear psychosis will not benefit the country in the long run. A nation which is so fearful of its own shadow really cannot progress. So what I would like to say to both of them is that if you have to restore the confidence of the people in their own lives, you have to take away this fear. You have to tell them, or you have to show by your actions that what they fear is nothing but a shadow, and you have to remove them. So without that, we cannot really go anywhere further in life. We are constantly looking, everybody, I mean, it's not just Muslims, even Hindus, everybody is constantly looking behind their shoulders. Our borders are not secure. We are hunting for enemies within our own communities, our own societies. We are regressing in our thought, in our attitudes, in our approach to life. And the more we remain insecure, more we'll stop thinking clearly. We'll stop relying on scientific way of approaching life. We'll become more and more conservative in terms of religion, in terms of our social behavior. We'll become more superstitious. We'll start believing in everything, and no nation can progress like that.
Thank you, Ghazala, for these reflections. Thank you for this fantastic book.
Thank you
very much. And so I would say in conclusion, you write in your final lines, you write that Islam's central purpose should be to invest people with nobility, with virtuousness, with large-heartedness, among other things, unquote. So my only response is to say, let us hope that followers, preachers, gurus, teachers of all religions will ask for nobility, for virtuousness, and large-heartedness from those who listen to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
There are a few audience questions. Prem Chandavarkar says, the Buddha said that anger is like holding an ember to throw on your enemy, but you are the one that gets burnt. Do you think the majority community will inflict harm on itself through this politics of hate?
So who is this question directed? Ghazala, please try your response.
Yes, absolutely. As I said just before this question was asked, that the more you marginalize a person, less you know about that person, and less you know, more fearful you become of that person. So eventually you are harming your own self. You are, your children will inherit this insecurity from you, because this is what, if the parents are teaching their kids, the kids will grow up to be fearful. The kids will grow up to be narrow-minded. Their approach to life, I mean, when they move out of their hometowns, they go out for employment, for education, they go to another country, their openness will be affected. Their broad-mindedness will be affected. So it's a very clear situation where the more you try and harm somebody else, you are harming yourself in an equal measure.
Mr. Gandhi?
Yes, I would just like to add this, that these words of the Buddha that have been quoted absolutely make complete sense, an obvious sense. And I sometimes think that if I were to have a physical burning coal inside my body, a piece of coal that is on fire is inside my body. So nursing hatred in my system is like keeping this burning coal in my body. I may imagine that this coal will burn others, and it might, but really it is burning me and those that I love. So of course, this hatred will recoil on the community that is encouraged to hate.
Thank you. The next question is from Saras Ganapati. So much of political and social discourse today seems to be shaped by social media. Can we use it more to counter communalism and Islamophobia? This question is also to the both of you.
Ghazala ji.
I think social media has to be used by people with a counter viewpoint, people who are challenging those who spread falsehoods about particular communities, or falsehoods about incidents, who are peddling fake news. Social media is a tool which has to be used by everybody and has to be used in a very productive manner. There is a lot of scope for people who want to counter fake news to actually maybe just flood the social media with their positive point of views, their lived in experiences, their shared experiences. And if you are giving more and more real life stories, or you're sharing it on social media, probably it will overwhelm those who are spreading falsehoods.
So thank you for the extremely important and relevant question. And of course, the answer is that we should use it. But then, people like me long for some creative people, those who can write plays and poetry and songs and make cartoons, because social media has to be used by those who want equality, but it has to be used by artists, by creative people. So so this is where I feel helpless. I can't make a cartoon. I can't write a song. I can't write a script of a play. But I wish the creative people, they're already doing it, and they're already doing a wonderful job, but there is more scope there. And maybe there should be a Zoom event where some creative artist can help the rest of us how we can be more effective on social media. We should be confident that what we stand for is certainly more just, that equality and gallantry and honor and respect is better than hatred and contempt. And so we know that we stand for the right thing, but let us find ways of expressing it. We don't have, mind you, we don't have the massive funding that the social media users of the other side have. I mean, that is a huge handicap. But in terms of the message and creativity, I think that we are on the winning side. So thank you for a tremendous question.
Aliya Rizvi talks about her maid, who is 39 years old. She wasn't even allowed by her husband to take the COVID vaccination till they stepped in. She can't read. She uses voice activation on her phone. How do you suggest she learns about her religion, Islamic history, and counter the clergy with the same? Is this the message? Is this the only message you have for Muslim women in India?
Actually, this is a huge, huge challenge. This lack of literacy, and as a consequence of lack of literacy, the lack of empowerment that women of certain strata face. I really don't know how they can learn about their own religion. Maybe they can ask people who they think are practicing or it in a proper way. Maybe they can ask fellow women who are, not shackled by the patriarchal dogmas within Islam. But it's a huge challenge, and I accept this, that the problem with Muslims in India is that the vast majority of them are not educated enough, because education is not just the ability to read and write, it's also the ability to process what you're reading and writing. So even if there are some people who are able to read and write, they're not able to comprehend it properly or process it properly. Probably the only way forward is for educated, progressive Muslims to create some kind of a collective where they can probably help the less fortunate ones with some sort of tools by which they can empower themselves. Now, learning of Quran or learning the true message of Quran is a luxury which these people cannot have, and I will not be foolish enough to say that that is the first thing they need to do. I think women of this, or men in this group of our society, in this part of our society, need to first be financially secure. My biggest concern as far as women is concerned has always been financial security. This entire triple talaq argument, discussion hinged on the fact that a woman is rendered destitute the moment the husband says talaq, talaq, talaq. But the fact of the matter is, even if he doesn't say triple talaq in one sitting, even if he spaces it out properly, says it over 3 or 6 months, even then the woman is rendered destitute because she is not empowered. She doesn't have education. She doesn't have any means of earning her livelihood. So the biggest issue as far as women of this social background is concerned is support and help from those who are able to help them. Maybe by imparting them some sort of training, some sort of vocational training by which they can learn some craft and earn something to keep body and soul together. Because if they're able to do that, a lot of their insecurity, a lot of their dependence on an abusive men in their lives will be reduced. I mean, maybe it will not go completely, but it will reduce substantially. So I think that should be the first step for women who come from this sort of a milieu. And once they are able to hold themselves together, independent of the men in their lives, perhaps then they can seek education as well, or learning of their religion. But the first step has to be the confidence that your ability to earn gives you. I've finished.
Here I am merging two questions, one from Mr. Mohan Rao and M. Kumar. They're on the same lines. Mohan Rao says he appreciates this discussion very much, especially that both of you have a sense of hope. It lifts his spirits. How come both of you do not use the F word, fascism? And M. Kumar asks, don't you think that the insecurity that is manufactured is deliberate and a hallmark of fascism?
आप शुरू करेंगी ग़ज़ाला जी?
Shukriya. You know, I am slightly wary of using labels because I think each situation is different from the other. So I'm wary. I have not done this in my book also. I don't like putting a template from outside India on Indian circumstances, Indian situation, because our problems and the manner in which our problems have emerged are unique to us. So that is the reason I have not used this word. This is the reason I don't even use the word terrorism very loosely. because again, it has a lot of connotations, and it has to be used with care, and it has to be used in the context of a particular situation. You cannot just use a broad, you can't have a broad brush approach to these words. So that is the reason I refrain from using labels.
So I also share these thoughts, which Ghazala ji has expressed extremely well, in very understandable words. I would only add that words like fascism, Nazism, terrorism, they're used so freely that when they are used, people don't quite recognize what is being expressed. Not everyone who hears those words have read a history of fascism or Nazism. So for them, these are sort of sounds and words. Whereas if we speak of coercion, zabardasti, intimidation, lack of justice, that if something happens and a poor, humble, vulnerable person, Dalit or Muslim or whatever, is attacked, those attackers are not apprehended, but the relatives of the person who is killed are pursued. These are things that the public understands. Of course, the learned, the highly educated, those who are may say that this resembles very much fascism. But there's one more thing I would add, that history is constantly evolving. And what we are seeing today in India and in some other countries is very similar to the fascism of the 1930s. But it may be something much more than that, maybe something new to it that we have to understand. So let us describe its features as accurately as we can before we give it a label.
Nourain Fazal says most quote-unquote progressive liberal Muslims are not considered as Muslims by the more traditional Muslims, excuse the use of labels, and are not considered as representatives of the community by political leaders or the media. So how do you think they can shape the narrative about Islam?
I think this is a very interesting question and something very close to my heart. This is the very unfortunate part, that we have stereotyped Muslims in such a way that even Muslims have accepted those stereotypes. So a certain type of a Muslim now is more Muslim than other Muslims, and they try and stand on judgment on others, which is why I said that the challenge for Muslims is to learn about their own religion so they can answer these people back, tell them that they are not Muslims or they are not Muslims enough. This is something which will happen and which will continue to happen as long as religion remains, or Islam remains, in the hands of few conservative ulamas or few conservative practitioners of faith. The wonderful part of Islam has been that it's a religion without clergy. It's a religion which says that it's between you and your Allah. So everybody can do whatever he or she wishes to do. It's between him or her and the God. So I think as far as acceptance by fellow Muslims is concerned, one shouldn't really care about them. The problem happens or comes when the government also kowtows to the conservative lot, because it feels that this is the real community, or these are the real representatives of the community. This is an uphill task to change this mindset, to change the mindset of people who want to represent the community, that actually it's a diverse community, and you should not look at the most conservative element of the community to get the sense of what Muslims are. You should look at the most progressive to understand what the Muslims are, and then reach out to the conservative, reach out to the dogmatic, and tell them that here is an example that should be emulated at point.
If I may just make a comment also, if I may be allowed. You know that the Hindu world, Hindu society, also has gurus, it has teachers, it has people who are venerated. But how many well-known Hindu teachers have said a word about the foolishness and the danger of carrying hatred? There are many the Hinduism may not have a regular clergy, but there are many Hindu platforms, non-political, religious platforms. How many respected Hindus have said, this hatred that we are spreading is terrible? And just as Ghazala ji and many other Muslims want Muslims to know really what Islam is, I think many Hindus want Hindus to describe what is Hinduism, what is the kind of human being that Hinduism wishes to create. So thank you for this question.
The next question is, again, I'm merging two questions together from Chitra Balakrishnan and Vinay Gopinath. Chitra asks, do you feel at all hopeful, Ghazala, that we can move to a position of greater empathy and dialogue between majoritarian groups and Muslims? What would it take? Are you hopeful about younger people wanting to listen more to each other? And continuing this question into Vinay's question, what can people who believe in Indian secularism do to restore civil discourse? Can you recommend resources, collectives, or books?
I think I'm extremely hopeful, and forums like this add to my hope. The most basic thing that we need to do to kind of reclaim our civility is to ask questions. If you feel that a Muslim is a particular type of a person, or if a Muslim behaves in a particular way and it makes you uncomfortable thinking about it, just go and ask the person, why are you doing this thing or whatever. I think this conversation, and I have written in my book also that one of my objectives of this writing this book is that we can create this bridge of conversation. As Mr. Gandhi said right in the beginning, that we do not even want to talk to the next door neighbor who's a Muslim and ask that person questions about him or her life or her faith. If we just start talking to one another, we'll realize that so many things, so many misgivings we have about one another, they're actually only misgivings. There's no iota of truth in what this absence of dialogue between the two communities has led to. So I think if this process starts, we will be able to regain our civility in our public life. The other thing is that we need to also understand why certain behaviors has not been considered polite worldwide. You know, you don't abuse a person. Abusing a person or hitting a person, why is it considered bad behavior? Because it is bad behavior. Whenever you have this urge to hit out at somebody, just pause and think that, is this a behavior behoving of a civilized person? If you just do that, automatically your conduct in your public life will become civilized. It will become worthy of being an Indian citizen. And from there, you can start the process of dialogue. So I think that is one way we can become a more inclusive, more polite, and more decent society. And hopefully we will become more secular society also once we kind of become more decent and more tolerant of each other, tolerant of our differences, tolerant of our disagreements. The other thing is I am temperamentally a very optimistic person. I always look for the tiniest light at the end of the tunnel, and I think maybe this process of reaching out to the other, process of understanding one another has already commenced. I always use this example of the Citizenship Amendment Act, the protests which broke out all over the country. Completely impromptu, unplanned, not politically directed. and people of all caste, communities, religions, age, gender, they were participating in it. They were risking their lives. They were risking their physical safety because in some places the police retaliation was quite brutal. So that what could be more hopeful than that?
Nurain has a follow-up question. She says, thank you for the response. How would you recommend parents or the community teach children about Islam? The challenge is that it's someone else's interpretation, given we don't learn Arabic as a language or the context under which Islam emerged as a religion, or the Quran or the Hadith that were written.
Actually, you don't need to understand Quran or learn about Quran in great detail. I mean, all children in India know what Hinduism is in a very basic way because we've learned it through our schools. We have learned it through our story books, our comic books, Amar Chitra Katha, or through television serials. There could be distortion, there could be exaggeration, there could be very loud way of communicating the religion, but you get the essence of it. So Hindus or Christians or anybody else need not learn about another's faith in great detail unless you really have interest in it. The simple thing that all religions actually were trying to emancipate that particular society at that particular point in time. That itself is enough. Now, how as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If so many people in the world converted, became Muslims, then obviously this religion was speaking to them. It could have happened that a religion was teaching only hatred, and yet people became Muslims and said, "Oh yes, yes, let's become Muslims and hate the rest of the world." This can't be happening. I mean, nobody becomes or embraces a faith because that faith doesn't do anything to yourself but harms others or teaches you to harm others. So I think if you just have this basic understanding or this appreciation, it's enough.
Thank you, Ghazala. The last question for tonight is to Mr. Gandhi from Pratiti Balal. Many former Gandhians have embraced the ideology of Hindutva. Do you have a message for them?
I don't know who these former Gandhians who have embraced Hindutva are, but supposing there are some, I would say that Gandhi had some core messages. One was Ishwar Allah Tere Naam. So can you believe Ishwar Allah Tere Naam and still dislike Muslims or want to give them second class status? That's one question. That Vaishnava Jan, that if you're a good man is he or she who does some good person, who does something for the stranger, who understands the pain of the stranger, Peer Parai Jane Re. So I think those are the central truths. And of course, we know where Gandhi stood on Hindu-Muslim equality. He was willing to be killed for it. He believed that this is what India needed and India would embrace. So those who love Gandhi and honor Gandhi and still are tempted by aspects of the Hindutva should reflect on Gandhi's life and his message.
Do allow me to bring the session to a close. Curiosity, openness, empathy, and educating oneself on one's own faith, as well as our neighbors. In history, since personal histories are what go on to build a nation's history, a truly pluralistic history as envisaged by those who imagined a new modern India, are some of the things that we take back from this conversation. Thank you, Ghazala, for speaking your truth. Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for your measured and calm ferocity. Thank you everybody who joined us today and for all your lovely questions. Apologies for if your question wasn't picked because we have several here and we're running short of time. All I have to say now is good night and see you next time.
Thank you so much.